Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight is Parshat Vayishlach, and we're going to start with the very first verse and the very first Rashi. So it says, Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav el Esav, achiv arza seir sedei Edom. Yaakov sent, this is what we'll discuss. I'm gonna translate it here as messengers. Yaakov sent messengers before him to Esav, his brother, in the land of Seir, the field of Edom. So what does Rashi say? Rashi says, classic short Rashi. He says two words on the word malachim, messengers. But the word malachim also means angels. And in fact, an angel is a messenger of God. So Rashi says malachim mamish. He sent real angels. In other words, that's the pshat, that's the simple, literal understanding according to Rashi. We would most likely think that the simple, literal meaning is he sent messengers. But Rashi is telling us malachim mamash, real angels. So I want to use this to try to understand why Rashi would say that. And we'll call it briefly, enter into a discussion about angels. So the first thing we notice is that Yaakov has many different experiences with angels. It starts last Parsha, where he dreams of a ladder that goes from earth to heaven, with angels going up and down. So here we see that in this, perhaps the most symbolic of all dreams. Now, all dreams are symbolic language of the unconscious, the subconscious, the supraconscious, or a message from God, many times in symbolic form. But there's a hint here, is if you take the letters of ladder, a sulam, and you switch the letters, you permute them differently, it reads semel. Semel is a sign or symbolism. In modern Hebrew, symbolism comes from this word, semel. So we have good reason to say that this is the most symbolic of all dreams. And if you go to museums around the world that have, we'll call it biblical art, or art from the Middle Ages, which was primarily Christian, that it's rare that you would see a good collection that doesn't have at least one painting of Yaakov's dream of the ladder. This is like just classic symbolism and ripe for artistic creativity. So Yaakov sees angels going up and down the ladder. At the end of the previous parsha, he is coming back to Israel, and he is greeted by angels. And he calls it machanayim. A machane is a camp. So he calls it in the plural, machanayim. So the reason Rashi explains is when he left Israel, and this is part of the explanation of why were angels going up and then coming down. We would think isn't the abode of angels in heaven? Why doesn't it say that Yaakov saw angels coming down and then going up? But it says the opposite. They're going up and coming down. So Rashi there explains that Yaakov is always accompanied by angels. And there are certain angels that are angels of the land of Israel, and certain angels are of outside of Israel. So what Yaakov was seeing, the angels going up were the angels of Eretz Yisrael leaving him because he's about to leave Israel. And the angels coming down are the angels of Chutz La'aretz, of outside of Israel, coming now to accompany him. At the end of the parsha, now he's coming back to Israel. So he's greeted by the angels of Eretz Yisrael. And he perceives the angels that have been accompanying him for 20 years outside of Israel. They're now leaving. So he called it Machanaim. He saw two camps of angels. So here, when Rashi says that Yaakov sent messengers to Esav, he interprets it malachim mamish. But we see more than that when in this week's parsha, Yaakov is going to fight with, the Torah says, with a man. Rashi says it's the archangel of Esav. That's who he's fighting with. So again, we see Yaakov is now fighting with the spiritual force behind Esav in preparation of meeting him the next day. Later, towards the end of Yaakov's life, so he is sick, and Yosef, Yaakov is now in Egypt. Yosef comes to be with him, and there's a whole discussion between Yaakov and Yosef. Yaakov is trying to tie up loose ends. And he mentions especially about how Yosef's mother, Rachel, died, and he buried her along the way. But as part of that whole discussion, he says, Hamalach hagoel oti mikol ra, yivarech et na'arim v'yikra behem shmi, v'shem avotai Avram v'Yitzchak, v'yidgu l'rov b'kerev ha'oretz. So this is actually, Yosef comes to visit his father, and he brings his two sons. And this is when Yaakov is blessing Manasseh and Ephraim. So he says to him right before he stretches out his hands, and if you remember, we're not going to go into depths here, but he took his right hand and he put it on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh, instead of what would be expected of blessing them like this. So in Fruits of the Orchard, there's a whole article about the significance of Yaakov switching his hands. But that's not our subject right now. But I'm just reading in English now what Yaakov says. He says, Hamalach hagoel oti, the angel that saved me from all evil, he will bless these young people, and they will be called in my name. And in the name of my fathers, Avram and Yitzchak, they will multiply and be fruitful in the midst of the Oretz. I brought all of this just to give another example of Yaakov seems to be very familiar with angels. And here he's saying, Hamalach hagoel oti, the angel that saved me from all evil. In other words, Yaakov is aware of being surrounded by angels all the time. So we see that Yaakov is not the first one. Avraham is visited by 3 angels to announce to him that he and Sarah will have children. And then these angels go on and they go to Sodom, and they're the agents, the messengers from God that bring Lot out of Sodom, and then Sodom is destroyed. And then at the Akedah, Avram, as it were, is like this with the knife, and it says an angel of God came and said, stop. So here we see that Avram also is aware and familiar with angels. When Hagar is sent away by Sarah, an angel comes to her aid. So I'm just mentioning all of this is that we see that there are many mentions of angels with the patriarchs. We do not see an angel with Yitzhak other at the Akedah, who is the one who says, don't lay a hand on Yitzhak. So Yitzhak is also aware of angels. So it says in the 91st Psalm, the 11th verse. This is something that we say every Motzi Shabbos, right after Shabbos goes out. It's part of a psalm that we read in synagogue. So it says, Ki melachav yitzaveh lach lishmarcha mikol derachecha. Because God will order his angels for you to guard you in all of your ways. This is obviously a very, very important verse here, and we'll come back to it. But Reb Shlomo made up a nigun to these words. Ki melachav yitzaveh lach lishmarcha b'chol derachecha, ki melachav yitzaveh lach lishmarcha b'chol derachecha, ki melachav yitzaveh lach lishmarcha b'chol derachecha. So here the commentaries point out, it says angels in the plural, that his angels will be commanded to you to guard you in all of your ways. But there's another verse in the 34th Psalm, the 8th verse, that says, let me get it here. So it says like this, Choneh malach Hashem saviv le're'av b'yichalsem, that God will have an angel camp around you, accompany you. The you here is to those that fear him, in order to save him. But here it's in the singular. Choneh malach, one malach. So one of the commentaries mention that, and this is one of the main points that we want to get to, that it says in Pirkei Avot the following. The 4th chapter, the 13th Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Let me just get my glasses here. So it says like this. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, ha'oseh mitzvah achat koneh lo parklit. That if someone does one mitzvah, he acquires for himself a defender. Now it's explained that defender here means an angel. Ha'over avera achat koneh lo katigor. But if someone does a sin, they acquire for themselves a prosecutor. Tshuva maasim tovim taris bipnei haparyanot. And tshuva and good deeds are a protection, are a shield against trouble, retribution, din, judgment. So here is a very, very important idea. And that is that our actions, mitzvot and the opposite of mitzvot, create angels. So we have to explain that, because usually we think of angels, and this is correct, as messengers of God. So here we have to understand that there's two, we'll call it levels of angels, two realities of angels. There are angels that are, we'll call it heavenly angels, and they are messengers of God. And God will send an angel, will send an angel to accomplish something. And we're even told that the definition of an angel is that they have one tafkid at a time, one purpose at a time. Their shlichut, their task is, they don't multitask. They have a task to perform, and that is their very essence. And they might be given another task. And then there are higher angels that do multitask. But one, we'll call it camp of angels, are heavenly angels, and they are the messengers of God. And so throughout the Tanakh, you see angels of God appearing to different people, but the basic general principle is that a messenger is not just a representative of the one who sends him or her, but at that moment is imbued with the essence of the one who sends him. And this is one of the great secrets of Chabad, because the term for the representatives of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, they're called shlichim. And this is really very close to the idea of malachim, messengers. And so wherever the Rebbe sent out a shliach, or even in our day where the Rebbe is not alive, but someone goes out with what's called the gushpanka, with the spiritual backing of the Rebbe. So these people, and in most cases it's a couple, they are infused with the power of the Rebbe. And so in the Tanakh, where we see over and over again, an angel comes, well, they're not just a messenger, they're like a clear channel of God's will. And at one of the crucial points of the Akedah, it's an angel who comes. And then many times afterwards, then it just says God, either Yud-K, Vav-K, or Elohim. But many times, at first it says an angel of God. So we have one class of angels that are God's messengers. But Pirkei Avot is telling us something very incredible, that our mitzvot, our good deeds, create angels. Here in Pirkei Avot, they're called defenders and prosecutors. But everyone understands this concept of we create angels. So this is like a second class of angels. And we are created B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. So in a certain way, it shouldn't surprise us, just like God has angels doing its bidding, that when we act in this world for the good or for the bad, we create angels. So of course, now we have to ask, well, what is an angel? We've identified an angel up to now as a messenger. Here in Pirkei Avot, it's understood in the same way, but with like a subtle difference, is that these angels eventually, especially on Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, when God opens the books and a judgment happens, so we're told, whether we take this symbolically or metaphorically or as reality, in the higher court, we envision it as like a court case. So someone's case comes up, it's Rosh Hashanah, everyone's case comes up, and just like in a court situation, you have the defending lawyer and the prosecuting lawyer. And so when it says in Unatana Tokef, this incredible prayer in Musaf, it says that God opens the books and they read themselves, and the signature of each person is in it. So in other words, the books that are opened we'll use the example of a computer. Imagine a computer that is recording everyone's thoughts, speech, and action. Everything we think, say, and do automatically is fed into the computer system. And on Rosh Hashanah, through Yom Kippur, as it were, someone pushes the button and the books open and it's all there. But so what is there are, in a certain way, the defending lawyer and the prosecuting lawyer are those lawyers that we created with our own actions. They come back to speak of our merits or speak of our negative marks. So this obviously is a very, very deep idea. And we see that in the books of the prophets. So a number of the prophets describe the angels that they see, especially in Ezekiel, the first chapter of Ezekiel, better known as Ma'aseh Merkavah, the workings of the chariot. So Ezekiel goes to great length and in great detail to describe the different angelic forces that he saw. And so now we could say is that an angel is an energy form. And even though some of the prophets actually describe angels in almost in a physical sense, Isaiah, he saw angels with 6 wings. But we have to understand that these are like very, very high prophetic visions. And we know, I talked before, if you go into a museum, well, you go into any museum in the world that has Middle Age art, which again is mostly Christian, you see angels with wings all over the place. Like that's one of the most used motifs are angels with wings. But they didn't pull it out of a hat. In the Tanakh, Ezekiel saw visions of angels with wings. Isaiah saw examples, vision of angels with wings. But Avram, when the three angels came to him, he thought they were human beings. And here we see also a very deep idea, is that an angel can take on virtually any form. And that's why we're told that when Elijah the prophet ascended to heaven in a fiery chariot, however we understand that, we're told that his soul was transformed into an angel. And that's why we have all these stories of appearances of Eliyahu Navi, and especially many of our greatest teachers, that Eliyahu came and learned with them, learned Torah with them, brought Torah from the heavens to reveal to them. So an angel, in theory, can take on even a physical form, but in general, when we think of angels, they are energy forms. They're manifested energy that comes, according to Pirkei Avot, from our mitzvot or our averas, our sins. So there's a beautiful teaching from Reb Shlomo that in the beginning of the Parsha, when Yaakov sends these angels, and we're going to get back to really understanding that in 1 minute, the messengers, he says, tell them, until now, Garti with Lavan. I lived with Lavan. And it's brought down that the word Garti, I dwelt with Lavan, is Gematria 613, which equals the 613 mitzvah. And so Yaakov was trying to tell Esav, even though I've been away for 20 years, and I've been with Lavan, who is not the purest, most spiritual person, I still managed to keep all the 613 mitzvah. So here we have a tradition that, at least spiritually, the patriarchs and matriarchs were already tuned into the spiritual foundations of all of the mitzvah. They were plugged in, and some say they even kept many of the mitzvot in a physical way. At Mincha of Shabbos, we say about Shabbos, we say Avram Yagel, Yitzchak Yiranein, Yaakov Ubanav Yanuchu Bo. That Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov all kept Shabbos on some level. On some level, they were already keeping Shabbat. So Yaakov is telling Esav, don't think just because I'm coming back with all of this wealth, and I wasn't anywhere near our father Yitzhak and his holy influence. I kept the whole Torah. So Reb Shlomo said, he said, so since each mitzvah that we do creates an angel. So these, in a sense, are the malachim mamish that Yaakov is sending. But he says like this, and he quotes Reb Zusha. Reb Zusha was a famous Hasidic Rebbe, one of the followers of the Maggid of Mezrich. And Reb Zusha once said, my soul ascended to heaven, and I was able to see the angels that are created from our mitzvot. And he said, Nebuch, like, oy vey, there were some angels that had no arms. Some angels had no legs. Some angels only had one eye. Some angels with all these defects, meaning that every mitzvah we do creates an angel. But what kind of angels are we creating? Are they, in other words, if we do the mitzvah with our whole heart and our whole soul and our whole might, then we create an angel that is whole. But what happens if we just knock off the mitzvot? We knock off the davening. So when it comes to Judgment Day, Nebuch, like our lawyers are going to come in. It's like, oh gosh, what have I done? What have I done? So Reb Shlomo brings this story, but his point is well taken. In other words, our mitzvah create energy. That's the main point here. Our deeds matter. They create energy. This is similar to, I'm not sure the source of it. I think it comes from a famous book, but a butterfly flaps its wings in Australia, and there's a tornado in Kansas. In other words, our thoughts, our speech, and our action actually create energy that affects the entire world. Most of the time, we're not aware of this. We're oblivious to this, but it is a reality. It is a reality. Obviously, our actions are going to make some kind of a difference in the world. Our speech is going to have some kind of reverberation, and our thoughts as well. Even our thoughts create energy. And all of these are angels. And so now if we go back, and with this we'll conclude the idea, when Rashi says, Yaakov sent malachim mamash, so we can understand that Yaakov understands he's about to confront Esav after 20 years. Or Esav is about to confront him because the messengers come back, the angels come back and say, Esav is on his way he's already heard you're coming back, and he's coming with 400 men. So it says that Yaakov was fearful. But when Yaakov sent these messengers were a result of his thought patterns. And this is what the Baal Shem said. Everyone quotes it. Think good, and it will be good. In other words, the way we think about our lives, think about the world, think about other people, that's the energy that we're putting out. It goes out. We might think it doesn't. We might even think that our speech doesn't matter, and we might even think our actions don't matter. But they do. But they do. And so Yaakov sends malachim mamash. He is sending his thought waves, his willpower in preparation for meeting Esav again after 20 years. So this was just I call it a very general overview to try to understand Rashi's insistence, malachim mamash, actual angels. So that's our first insight for tonight. The next is we're going to look at one part of the classic archetypal fight between Yaakov and the man, the angel, Esav, himself, and God. For those who have Orchard of Delights, I wrote extensively about who was Yaakov fighting with. Because it says he was left alone and he fought with a man. So immediately we have a contradiction. If he's left alone, how could there be a man there? And if there's a man there, then he's not alone. So there's literally thousands of commentaries on who he was fighting with, what the purpose of the struggle was, what was the price that had to be paid. In the end, he was injured. And why was he fighting? And who was he fighting? But we're going to look at just one verse here where it says, give me 1 second. V'yivater Yaakov levado, v'yeyavek ish imo ad alot hashachar. This is the beginning of the explanation, that Yaakov was left alone, and he fought with a man until the early morning, until the sun began to rise. So the words we're going to try and understand is Vayivater Yaakov levado. Yaakov was alone. Now, there's another verse in the prophets, and you'll pardon me because I didn't write down the source for this one, that says, V'niskav Hashem levado b'yom hahu. On that day, this is talking about when Mashiach comes, God will alone be elevated. So if you'll notice, you have the same word, levado. V'yavater Yaakov levado. Yaakov is left alone. And then you have v'nisgav Hashem levado b'yom hahu. And Hashem is exalted and alone on that day. Now, that's the day that God is like, as it were, going to take over and make his presence fully known to the whole world. So in both cases, we have the word levado. So again, I'll refer you to Parshat Ha'azinu in Orchard of Delights. In Orchard of Delights in Ha'azinu, I deal with a similar thing we're gonna talk about now, but I'm adding all kinds of new insight, and that is over there. It says Hashem badad yanchenu. God alone. The word badad is the same root as levado. God, alone will lead them. This is in the song Ha'azinu. But if you put the punctuation differently, it's Hashem is alone. He leads them. So what does it mean God is alone? Here alone means unique. Unique. And that's why actually in the old translations, I'm not saying these are wrong, but of the Shema, so usually it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." In many new translations, it will say almost the same thing, but a little bit different. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, God is unique." It translates one as unique. And this is in Sefer, in the Zohar, in the section called Petach de Eliyahu. Petach de Eliyahu appears in many, many Sidurim, and many people read it before Kabbalat Shabbat. It's a very, very mystical track, and in it it says that God is one, echad v'lo bechushban. He is one, but not the number one of mathematics. In mathematics, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. So one means one. But the Zohar says that's when we say that God is one, Hashem echad, echad v'lo bechushban, that his oneness is unique. It's not like this the first of all the numbers, and then there are many other numbers that follow. Echad v'lo bechushban. So, but here we see that we are created in the image of God. And so the idea is that just like God has this aspect of uniqueness, with the term levado, badad, so do human beings. And that's why in our parsha, where it says, Vayivater Yaakov levado, and then we have this other verse, Nizgav Hashem levado. Each one is trying to express the uniqueness of, here it's Yaakov. Yaakov, at the end of the struggle with we'll call it the angel now, gets a new name, Yisrael. And Yisrael is unique. So we see by Avram Avinu, many of you have the book, One Was Avraham. That comes from a verse in Yechezkel. Echad haya Avram. One was Avram. So what does that mean? It means Avram was unique. And that is why the subtitle of the book is, I don't have it in front of me, Reflections on History's Most Influential Person. Avram was unique. There was never anyone who influenced the world as dramatically, as revolutionary as Avram. So here I'm just trying to make a parallel between the idea of God's uniqueness and Israel's uniqueness. So going back to Avram, and this, of course, is in the book, is that he was called Avram HaIvri, Avram the Hebrew, and that's because the word Ivri comes from the word over, to cross over. And we learn this, that Avram crossed over the barrier between idol worship, paganism, and the belief in one God. And the Midrash says that Avram crossed over that spiritual line, and he stood on one side of the world alone, and the rest of the world was on the other side. Avram's intention, though, was that eventually everyone would cross over with him. That was his intention, not to be alone, but to spread the knowledge of one God in the world, so everyone would, in a sense, be an Ivri, would cross over. So there's a fascinating discussion in the Gemara, I'm sure many of you have heard this, where a statement is made that God wears tefillin. Of course, we don't mean this in a physical sense. This is a symbolic language, metaphorically. Nonetheless, the sage claims, and the sages accept this, God wears tefillin. So then they ask, well, we know what's in our tefillin. There's scrolls that have the Shema in it. They say, well, what is in God's tefillin? And so the answer, and it's the opening verse, not the opening verse, it's the opening verse of the middle section of Mincha on Shabbat. In other words, we have the three introductory blessings, and then we have the three final. In the middle is where in the daily Amida we make requests. But in Shabbat, we don't make requests. So in the middle, there's only one blessing. And it starts, Ata echad, v'shimcha echad, umi ka'amcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. And I'll translate in a second, but this is what they say is in God's tefillin. It says, you are one, and your name is one, and who is like your people Israel, one nation in the earth. We're told that that's what's in God's tefillin. So both of these are based on the word one, unique, levado. And so we'll just end that on Shabbat and holidays, we don't wear tefillin. We don't wear tefillin on Shabbat and holidays. And so what is the meaning here? In other words, if during the week I wear tefillin in order to promote or advertise or connect myself to the oneness of God, and God is wearing tefillin, and he is, in a sense, promoting and advertising to the world that Israel is unique and one nation in the world. So what happens on Shabbat when we don't wear tefillin? So in Nusach Sfard and Sfardi, not Nusach Ashkenaz, that between Kabbalat Shabbat and the evening service, there in Ashkenaz, they read from Mishnayot about Shabbat. And in Nusach Sfard and Sfardi, it's a section from the Zohar, a very, very mystical text called Kigavna. And it's all about God's unity, that like the Ari coined this kavana l'shem yichud kudsha brichu v'shchinte v'yached shem yudke b'vavke v'yachuda shalim b'shem kol Yisrael. May the Holy One, blessed be He, and His Shekhinah, His indwelling presence. And we always learn that, again, symbolically, the Holy One, blessed be He, is as it were the masculine, and the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is feminine. And then the Ari said, and that's part of the idea of unifying the four letters of God's name and this unity. So this part of the Zohar that we read on Shabbat talks about the unity in the upper worlds. And then it talks about how this unity is manifest in this world with Am Yisrael. And so here, this is like in place of wearing tefillin, where we're acknowledging God's oneness, uniqueness, unity, and God is acknowledging that on Shabbat, the Jewish people are privy to experiencing this kind of unity. So again, those who have Orchard of Delights, look in Parshat Ha'azinu, and you'll see a whole section about this idea of God's uniqueness and Am Yisrael's uniqueness. But here we added some new ideas. Okay, now we have time for one more insight. And I came up with this on Shabbat. That's why I really want to share this. At the end of Parshat Vayishlach, there's a section called, "These are the kings that ruled in Edom before there was a king in Israel." And it goes through 8 kings. The first 7 kings, it says their name. Some of them it says where they lived, but it says on all of them, they ruled and they died. And then the next king, and he ruled and he died. It goes to 7 of them. The 8th one is Hadar, and his wife is mentioned. It's the only king it's mentioned that was married. Her name is Mehetabel, and it names where they lived, and it doesn't say that he died. So we would read this and really not know what to do with this. We would think it's a lineage of kings that ruled in Edom. And for whatever reason, the Torah didn't mention the names of any of the wives except the last one. And that's it. But the Arizal, based on his understanding of the Zohar, made this section one of his main sources of innovation. And he explains in short, that this is the story of Shvirat HaKelim encoded in symbolic language. And this is where in the previous world of Tohu, the lights were incredibly pure and strong, and the vessels of creation could not hold the light, and one king after another, and each king is a sphera. Each of the sphirot of the lower 7 sphirot broke. And this is what's commonly called Shvirat HaKelim. Now, I have a set of books from Rav Ginsburg that he spends 350 pages discussing these 8 kings and the teachings of the Ari and all the symbolism behind it. So this is at the end of our parsha. So there's a discussion among the Kabbalists, which of the sphirot broke? If we're talking about the breaking of the vessels, and we're talking about the vessels are the sphirot, well, which ones broke? So what would seem the simplest idea is that the 7 kings, where it says they ruled and they died, these are the 7 lower sfirot. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Hadar represents the beginning of Olam HaTikun, of the world of rectification. And we've learned this many, many times, that our world, this is all according to the Arizal, is called the world of rectification. And it's made up of the fallen, broken vessels of the previous world. But along with the broken vessels, the light that was in the vessel when it shattered also descends to this world. And so the Ari explained that our purpose is to fix the world, to identify, find, and redeem the lights, which will then reconstruct the vessels in a way that they can hold the light. So all of this, the Arizal, through his understanding of the Zohar, understood this very, we'll call it obtruse section called, these are the kings that ruled in Edom before there was a king in Israel. Before there was a king in Israel hints to Olam HaTikun, the world of rectification. And the kings of Edom represent the fallen vessels, the fallen sfirot. But actually, the majority of Kabbalists say that the breaking began from Da'at, which is the one above Chesed. And so to get the 7, and this is done very commonly in Kabbalah, is Netzach and Hod are put together. They're like the 2 legs. They're always, even like Chesed and Gevura are the 2 arms, but Chesed and Gevura we always talk about are like opposite energies, that they can be complementary, but they're basically very opposite energies, but not Netzach and Hod. Netzach and Hod are always spoken about as working together, as being like 2 parts of the same thing. That's why they're called the 2 legs, which are attached to the trunk of the body. So here, and this is how Rav Ginsburg gives it over, that the Shvira begins from Da'at, from knowledge. Now, why that's important is, if we go back to the story of creation, when God creates Adam and puts him in the Garden of Eden, then we have the whole story with the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And we're told that in the Torah, there are 2 in the Torah and 1 in the Tanakh. There are 3, call them episodes, that represent in symbolic terms the breaking of the vessels, meaning a situation where there's so much light, but the vessels can't handle the light. And the first one is in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Chava are in utopia. They have, everything is in potential a perfect reality. And the light, we could imagine the light was very strong. This is Gan Eden. This is utopia. And that's why it says symbolically that they were naked and were not ashamed. In other words, they in potential, they were in a perfect situation. In the end, without going into it, they ate from the Vayeitzei Tov v'Ra, and the result was exile. But this symbolically is the breaking of the vessels. The light was too strong. The example I use sometimes is when we have what we call it a 2-dayer. Even Rosh Hashanah in Eretz Yisrael is 2 days. Sometimes it comes after a Shabbat, and you have a 3-dayer, or you go into Shabbat. So for a lot of people, like 3 days of Yontav is like a little bit too much for me, right? I don't have the kelim for all of this holiness. And by the end of the 3rd day, people are like, like a little bit on nerve. That's just an example. But the idea is, in the Garden of Eden, it was such light. They didn't have the ability to really handle it. And that's how they ended up eating from the Vayeitzei Tov v'Ra. And the breaking was they went into exile. They had to leave the garden. The second example is a more obvious one, when Moshe broke the tablets. Here, God revealed himself to Israel at Mount Sinai like never before in history and never after. We're told that the 7 heavens opened up, that every word that God spoke, their souls left their bodies. They did, you can imagine having that kind of a revelation of God. And they came to Moshe and said, you speak to God. We can't handle it. And in the end, 40 days later, Moshe broke the tablets because the people obviously couldn't handle that kind of revelation. They didn't have the vessels. And the third is we'll call it the breaking of the temple. Here we had the first temple where, according to tradition, the Shekhinah was palpably felt in the temple. And when one came to the temple, one felt God's presence. So also, that is awesome light. We didn't have the vessels for it. And the temple was broken. So going back to this idea of the breaking of the vessels begins with dat. And that's really connected to the whole story of Vayeitzei Tov v'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So here I have to introduce an idea. I believe we've spoken about this before, perhaps many times. It's the Baal Shem Tov explained that all of reality can be understood as worlds, souls, and divinity. Especially each of the letters manifests in the world, the physical material world, on the level of souls, and on a godly level. Worlds, souls, and divinity. If anyone has Rav Ginsburg's book on the Hebrew letters, this is the basics of the book, that he explains each of the letters. How does the letter Aleph manifest in the world? Where do we see an Aleph in the physical material world? Where do we see the Aleph manifest in the human psyche, in the intellect, in the emotions? And where do we see the Aleph as a channel of God's energy coming into this world? But the Arizal, who comes before the Baal Shem Tov, had a very, very similar idea, but he gave it different names. So his names were, instead of worlds, he called it vessels, kelim. Instead of souls, he called it nitzotzin, sparks. And instead of Elokut, divinity, he called it light. So it's almost exactly the same, and it's very likely that the Baal Shem Tov took the same idea and he just reframed it in, it's actually the Mashiach. This is the famous Aliyat Neshama that the Baal Shem Tov had, where the Mashiach revealed to the Baal Shem Tov that every letter has a level of worlds, souls, and divinity. But again, the Ari is about 150 years before the Baal Shem Tov, and he called it lights, sparks, and vessels. The sparks are the souls. So what happened in Shvirat HaKelim? In Shvirat HaKelim, the vessels shattered all over the place. And the lights that were in the vessels also got spread out, but the lights were more sparks. They're more sparks, and that means that they were souls. So here we can understand something very, very, very deep, that when Adam and Chava were sent into exile, so they were sent out into the world. They had been in a place of pure light. That's the lights of the Arizal, the sparks, and the vessels. And so Adam and Chava going into exile is like what happened at Shvirat HaKelim, is that the sparks of light actually hover over the vessels in the hope of the future, when we find the light, redeem the light, it will reconstruct the vessels, and we will have true tikkun. And so where do we see this idea? So in the second verse of the Torah, and you'll pardon me, I'm going a little bit longer than usual, but I want to finish this idea. In the second verse of the Torah, so it says that the earth was tohu vavohu. This is the world of tohu, and darkness was on the face of the deep. This represents the previous world of tohu. And then it says, V'ruach Elokim mirachefet al pnei hamayim, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And so the Arizal said, when you ask, well, how many sparks of light fell? He says 288. So everyone asks, well, it's not like a very symbolic number. What does 288 mean? So he learns it from the word mirachefet, hovers. The first and last letter of mirachefet is mem and tav. Spells met, died. The middle letters are resh, chet, pei, which equals 288. So the Ari interpreted just like he interpreted the 7 kings that ruled and died as each of the sfirot that cracked from the intensity of the light. So here, the 288 vessels died, met. That's why it says the kings ruled and they died. And the word means hovered over. And so Rav Ginsburg explains that the sparks of light that fell into this world, and 288 is a symbolic number. There's sparks of light everywhere. But symbolically, the Ari understood that this verse is telling us a great secret, that the sparks of light are hovering over the vessels. Now, if we go back to what the Arizal said, that all of reality is orot, lights. This is what the Baal Shem called Elokut, divinity. And then there are nitzotzim, there's sparks. These are souls. And then there are kelim, vessels, that the Baal Shem Tov called worlds. So we see that they're very, very parallel. But the point that I'm leading to is the role of the soul in the world. We notice in the Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov, the middle section are souls. In other words, the function of a soul is to unify, just like in Yaakov's dream that we read about last week, to unify heaven and earth. The ladder connecting heaven and earth, that is the mission of the soul in this world. We are the ladder connecting God to the world, the lights to the vessels, spirituality to physicality, the soul to the body. And so the sparks of light that are hovering over the vessels, that's why we're told in the Aleinu, every day, 3 times a day, that our purpose is litakein olam b'malchut shakai, to rectify the world in the kingdom of God. This is our purpose. This is the purpose that God gave us. And that, in a sense, is, there's an expression that the Lubavitcher Rebbe used often, that the spoiling or the breaking is the fixing. That out of any darkness will come light. Out of exile will come redemption. Out of evil will come good. And I should add that Rav Ginsburg has been using this theme to discuss what's happening right now in Israel. This idea that we just did and are experiencing a tremendous challenge, trauma, pain, real tragedies. But from that will come something new and something very good. This is Rav Ginsburg's theme about what's happening right now. We can't erase what happened, but we can understand that this is going to lead us, if we do the work that we have to do, to something very positive that will come out of this. So here we see the role of the soul. When Adam and Chava left the garden, it seemed like a punishment, but it's a reenactment of a more primordial shvirat hakelim, of the breaking of the vessels. And now we are the sparks hovering over the vessels, meaning it's our purpose to fix this world. That's why the Ari called it Olam HaTikun, the world of rectification. So I just want to end with one other thing. It's a very Kabbalistic idea, is we know that there are 4 Kabbalistic worlds: the world of action, the world Olam HaAsiyah, the world of formation, Olam Yetzirah, the world of creation, Olam HaBriyah, and the world of emanation, Olam HaAtzilut. But the Arizal revealed even a 5th world, which is called the 4 worlds I just described correspond to the 4 letters of God's name. And the 5th world that the Ari revealed is what's called the Kotso Shel Yud, the tip of the Yud. And that's called Adam Kadmon, primordial man. So the Ari said, where did Shvirat HaKelim happen? What world? He said it happened in Malchut of Adam Kadmon. Now, Adam Kadmon, primordial man, is not Adam and Chava in Garden of Eden, but there is a parallel. There is a parallel. They're not exactly the same, but they're almost called the same thing. So he said that the breaking of the vessels happened in Malchut of Adam Kadmon. But then he said the eighth king, the one who didn't die, who represents the beginning of Olam HaTikun, so he is coming from Yesod of Adam Kadmon. Yesod is above Malchut. So the question is, what is the Ari trying to tell us? All of that was very Kabbalistic terminology, but what does that mean? And so we know that Yesod is always associated with the tzaddik. Tzaddik Yesod Olam. The tzaddik is the foundation of the world. So, and this we're going to conclude. This is who this Hadar and Mehetavel. And the woman here plays the key role, because all the other kings, they were not married, or we don't know if they were married. But the idea is that they weren't married. There was no unity. But Hadar and Mehetavel, they represent Tikkun. They represent the unification of male and female that runs through all of creation. And the fact that this king comes from a place above the Shvira, that means that a human being created in the image of God has the ability to fix the world. That's what the Ari is trying to tell us. Again, it's very Kabbalistic terminology, but the fact that Hadar and Mehetavel are coming from Yesod of Adam Kadmon means that we're hovering over, we're the sparks that are hovering over a broken world. And God has made us, I'm going to connect the first insight. God is making us the messengers to fix the world. It's a very, very profound idea. We are Malachim Mamish. Malachim Mamish. We are doing God's bidding. Then we can ask, well, why did God do this whole thing all together? Is that we could fix the world, and in that way earn being in the image of God. Like the sages say, just like God creates worlds, we have the ability to create worlds. This is telling us how awesome our souls are, the power that we have. So I'm going to end with a blessing that this is a world made up of the broken pieces of a previous world. We all see the brokenness. We see it everywhere. But we also see the potential, and we see all the good and the awesomeness of this world. But we're in the middle. We're in the middle of the ladder connecting heaven and earth, God and the world. So I just bless us that, especially in these very, very trying times, that we keep focused on redeeming the light. We keep focused on finding light wherever we can and bring goodness to the world. If we could do that, we'll see Mashiach very, very soon.